We are very excited to be bringing Dr. Lara Briden to the mix. She is a naturopathic doctor. She is an author. She is a podcast host. And what I am so excited about is I am going into an area where I know nothing. Nothing. We're tapping into women's health a bit here, but we've been covering a lot of the perimenopausal and menopausal stuff. But I think you guys are going to be blown away about the knowledge that she's throwing down. So, Lara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kwadwo. I'm looking forward to chatting.
And I got to throw this down too. We are both Western Canadians, Albertans, although
Yes.
you're in a much sexier place than I am right now, being in Ottawa. You're in where in New Zealand are you right now?
I'm in Christchurch, New Zealand, Otautahi, New Zealand. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the temperature like today?
It's high summer. It's January, so it's the middle of summer. It's going to be like 25 Celsius. Yeah.
Oh my God. You might have a visitor in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But Lara introduced me to this term before we were talking on the show today about evolutionary mismatch. And I think this is a good way of diving into some of these women's health issues. So we're all 4 years old. What does evolutionary mismatch mean?
Okay. It means symptoms or disease risks that come from the mismatch of our ancient physiology with our modern environment. And that includes modern food environment, because we're animals. I mean, some people don't like to hear that, but my background before I became a naturopathic doctor, as I was an evolutionary biologist. And for me personally, I take great comfort from the fact that we are biological creatures, that we've evolved over a long lineage, and that we have certain requirements that we've adapted to over the years. And as you can imagine, the last 10,000 years has been quite a change, but the last 50, 60, 70 years has been a huge change for us.
No, that is absolutely true. And I think, having the concept of evolutionary mismatch, maybe we could illustrate it in terms of some of the issues with women's health. Like, for example, menstrual period, perimenopausal periods of life. Like, what's a good example when it comes to women's health that you could illustrate?
Well, there's lots going on with women's health, actually. So I'll start with kind of one of the more mainstream ones, one that gets talked about a lot, and then I think sort of misunderstood, which is that obviously we have more periods now than we used to, right? So our ancestors they still had periods. I'm pretty confident. I mean, we don't know for sure because we can't go back 100,000 years to ask them. But, a lot of the time they were pregnant a lot more of the time, and they were breastfeeding a lot more of the time. And so the estimate is, we have about 400 periods now over a lifetime, and they maybe had 40. And so there's straight away that's different for human physiology. And sometimes that fact gets used as an argument for hormonal birth control, which we can circle back to. But I'll just point out, being on hormonal birth control, contraceptive drugs, is not the same as being pregnant or breastfeeding. It's a different hormonal situation. But another example of evolutionary mismatch is, I actually think any symptoms that arise with the perimenopause transition are a classic case of evolutionary mismatch. There's no biological reason really why that transition should be as symptomatic as it sometimes is, but it's just, we're trying to do this in the modern world. And as I just said, a very different situation. We spent less time pregnant. We've maybe been on hormonal birth control. There's alcohol, there's, circadian disruption, all these things that make what should be actually just in some ways a superpower, really, to go into our post-reproductive years, has turned it into what is sometimes viewed as a disease state, but it's not a disease.
Yeah.
So, and actually one thing, just like, our ancestors would have what they probably would have done, would have varied individual to individual, but had their last baby around, early 40s, kind of 42, breastfeed for 3 or 4 years, and then just cruise from kind of the low estrogen state of breastfeeding into just cruise straight into menopause. Kind of, it would have been quite a different scenario. Whereas in our modern day perimenopause, we get these huge spikes of estrogen and up and down estrogen roller coaster, which can be really difficult to deal with.
Wow. So let's start with the perimenopausal scenario first. And so why are we seeing the mismatch? Like, why are we seeing such changes in or like more symptomatic scenario for perimenopausal women? Like, is it what we're eating? Is it you alluded to, like we've been taking these exogenous hormones? Like, what is it?
Well, let's just talk about some of the evidence. So first of all, I want to say one thing, which is to debunk a narrative that menopause is an accident of living too long. That is not correct from a scientific perspective. So we have, of course, life expectancy, as you know, humans used to be, across cultures, used to be relatively low. The average was 45, but that doesn't mean everyone died by 45. It did not mean that at all. It meant that there was a high rate of infant mortality or childhood mortality. Unfortunately, like historically, in some, it was like 1 in 2 kids wouldn't make it past 5. Like, it's so shocking for us to think about that now. And people died from infections and women died in childbirth. And so thank goodness that is not the case anymore. But even we know from updated archaeological evidence that if people were lucky enough to survive all those hazards, a few people got through. And so the biological lifespan that the human frame can sort of sustain and has always been able to sustain, or at least for some amount of time, several 100,000 years, has been 70, 80 and beyond. So, and I think I said to you off air, I'll just repeat it again here, there's some lines of evidence to suggest that a longer human lifespan for humans of both sexes, because we evolved together, was selected for because women's post-reproductive decades are so beneficial for the family group, if that makes sense. And we know that actually from some modern people, like everyone knows women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, getting stuff done. And like, seriously, they gather more food in some groups than any other demographic. The young men are practicing, fighting or whatever it is. I'm just speculating, the young women are having babies, the old men are telling stories, and the older women are like gathering food, like a lot of it, and sharing it with everyone. And so that meant that their long-lived genes were selected for, if that makes sense. So we should be able to do this. In some ways, it should have been a superpower, because we get this shift in our metabolism with menopause where we require quite a degree of metabolic flexibility to do this. Is metabolic flexibility a topic that's come up with some of your other? Yeah. So you know about this. So women of reproductive age just require more carbohydrates, basically, like just higher energy state. And you need quite a lot more carbs to do all of that, make babies and even have periods and breastfeed. But women post-reproductive really should be kind of leaner, requiring fewer calories, which used to be a superpower. Like, think about that. You're getting all this stuff done. You've got all these skills. You don't need to eat as much. You can share all your food with your descendants. But now we've got this same shift in our modern world, that's going to look like a shift to insulin resistance in our modern food environment. Does that make sense? Like, so if we're eating in this food environment of excess carbohydrate and excess, certain types of vegetable oils and all the things that impair insulin sensitivity in our modern world, that doesn't match well with the menopausal shift, because it comes down to, because estradiol is quite insulin sensitizing, so normally protects younger women to some degree from insulin resistance, and then boom, with menopause our physiology shifts. I think of it like shifting gears or downshifting or something, but it could be a good thing, but it's often going to translate into insulin resistance, some really pretty dramatic things that happen with the brain during the perimenopause transition that can have long-term risks. They can produce symptoms, but also arguably produce a risk for dementia. In my book, Hormone or Perimanual, my perimenopause book, I talk about perimenopause as a tipping point for health at our critical window, it's the perfect time to get as healthy as you can. Yeah.
No, that is, I mean, this is what I think is another reason why I think we needed to talk about the perimenopausal area, because as you said, it's like that tipping point for when you being at risk of metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, you mentioned also long-term risk of dementia and so forth. I honestly, it's sorry, my wife is saying just had to pick up something. Are you okay, mommy? What is it? Your what? Sorry, well,
yeah, it's all good. It's
seconds,
fine.
Sorry.
You can. That's what editing's for.
That's what editing's for. Sorry, Stokely. This is a couple second hiatus. Sorry, what would you say you were looking for? I might have seen it. It was, but no. Bye. Sorry about that, crew.
Yes, it's all fine.
So I'll re-answer that question to make it easier, Stokes. So I really like that point you're making about that tipping point, Lara, because if we could be as ahead of the game as possible, like we need to address that time period for our women, because as you mentioned, cardiovascular risk, dementia, osteoporosis, all these things that make you more at risk of seeing me in the intensive care unit. Like we really should be thinking about ways of how to mitigate that. And I guess the concept too, I did, you would hear like theories on, people living longer, so that's why they're having the menopause symptoms. But I this is the first time hearing that, we've done, we could be contributing to like exacerbating some of these symptoms, which I think is important, because knowing this, it empowers us to try and do something about it.
And it reframes it too for women, that we're not broken, right? Like that we're not an accident to still be here. That whole menopause is an accident of living too long. That's very corrosive to
it's not productive.
Women. It's just, and I mean, if it was true, that would be one thing, but it's scientifically just not true. There's a book, if your listeners are interested, called The Slow Moon Climbs by a historian, Susan Mattern, I think is her name. It inspired me quite a lot. I read that book just before I wrote my book. And she draws together a lot of pieces of evidence, including some of the deep history, deep time, like, archaeological, paleontological evidence from humans. And just, builds this case that I think we were meant to do this. A longer human lifespan evolved because of menopause, essentially. And even today, like people around the world, lots of people in other cultures, they know about menopause. They know women stop having periods or being able to have babies by their late 40s, but they're happy about it. There aren't symptoms. They consider it's a good thing. It's like second girlhood. It's this, resurgence of energy. So the fact that it's so symptomatic and so medicalized for us is a problem.
I really want to reinforce that point too, about like, this is like, I mean, if you think about that stage of life, kids might be out of the house or close to being out of the house. You could really build your career, and I think of many of the colleagues at work that I know that have had to sometimes put their careers on hold for raising families and so forth. Now it's your time, and this is where you have also a lot of, in terms of work, you tons of experience. You get to be a role model to so many. Like, this is a real opportunity for growth and to be empowered. And so we really should be fostering that. And selfishly, I think part of the reason I've been diving into this too is we're in a healthcare crisis, and knowing that some women are retiring early. There's also the mental health issues around this time period. Like I think we got to do everything we can to get everybody like available, and this is part of that. I truly believe this is part of that.
So true. Yeah.
So just like I'm 4 years old then.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that we offset that mismatch? Like I know we touched on it a little bit, but like what are some of the ways that women can
Yeah.
be less symptomatic?
Sure. I'm happy just to talk through, some of the key treatment options that I talk about in my book. Please. I don't like being coy on podcasts, and like, I'll just give it to you.
Give it to you straight.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to say about you're talking about, reframing menopause as a time of, at your peak powers in terms of work, potentially. There's also, and this is real, and I have to think it's biological, because my patients told me about it, but then I didn't really know until I hit it myself, because I'm 53 now. So I'm like well into this. And there's a cheekiness that comes. There's this like kind of, like you just feel like spending more time outside. You're just like happy to say no to people. There's definitely
confidence.
Something. Yeah, it's a confidence, I guess. But it's kind of a more of a, it's weird. It's sort of a combination of sort of more of a selfishness, but yet at the same time, totally serving the community. And this is, I think, fits with historically what it would have been.
I totally know what you're talking about. I mean, maybe not to ghettoize this, but it's like swag. Like they just got a little bit of like swagger in their step, a little bit of confidence. It's like, you know what? I've been there before. I've lived experience. I just don't give a damn anymore. Like, it's just, I definitely, like, I didn't really think about it till you said it, but I definitely
see that.
I've seen that.
Women like that. I'm sure we all have women like that in our lives, and thank goodness they're around. Like, I like one of the quotes from Susan Matern's book, the book I referenced earlier, is, where would we be without all these old ladies? Like, seriously, they're holding us, they're holding the world together.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. All right. So what are some ways to feel better for the perimenopause transition? And one thing just to say is, one of my other key messages is the symptoms can start a lot earlier, younger than women realize. So this is another. So first of all, not everyone gets symptoms. Some women just truly don't. Like, they're fine. So they don't want to be like unnecessarily medicalizing themselves and thinking, oh, is something wrong? Am I okay? So that, like, if you're feeling fine, then good. But if you're even early 40s, because symptoms can start up to 10 years before the final period, and they can start while periods are still regular. And a lot of it's from losing progesterone, which I talk about in my book. And so obviously I'm talking about if you're cycling naturally. If you're on the pill, that's a whole different situation, because the whole hormonal system is shut down. But like, if you're having natural cycles, and you can start to lose progesterone, your estrogen starts to spike higher and dropping lower. And that, one of them, it's primarily a neurological transition. This is what the research papers talk about. It's a brain recalibration or a brain rewiring. And the other side symptom can be super heavy periods for some women, but we'll just leave that out of it. But in terms of the neurological, what can start to arise, or much earlier than you think, is a reduced ability to cope with stress, sleep disturbance. That's the big one. I'd say women are like, what the heck? I used to be a great sleeper, and now I'm popping awake in the night and I can't function like this. So that's one of them. There can be night sweats as well, usually premenstrual night sweats. It can be increased in migraines. This is a really classic one. Like, someone might have had migraines when they were in first puberty. So now we're talking about perimenopause, which is second puberty. Migraines in first puberty, and then maybe migraines on the pill or something, but then they went away during those peak reproductive years, and then they start to come back. That's another symptom. And increased risk of anxiety and depression. That is real. That's in the research. And again, not everyone gets that, but it's important to know too that these symptoms are temporary. So I think that really helps women too. Like, even if you are experiencing symptoms, this isn't how you're going to be forever now. There's this cheeky confident, what we just described coming. By the time you get to your late, probably your mid 50s, you're going to start to think, wow, this is awesome. I think in most cases. So and one thing to know that it happens earlier than you think is important, because a lot of times I'm going to go to their doctors and say, oh gosh, could this be perimenopause? And there's shame around that too. As soon as you think, oh, wait, what? Is this perimenopause? It can't be. Like, I'm only 42. And then you start to feel this is extra layer. You've got the physical symptoms, and then this layer of like stigma and shame on top of it, which is crazy. But then you go to the doctor and you think, I think this is happening. And for one thing, your average family, like GPs, not going to have a lot to offer, actually, unfortunately, which is why we're doing this today. But also they might say mistakenly, oh no, like you're still having periods. So come back to me when your periods stop. And actually what the research shows, by the time your periods stop, usually 1 or 2 years after the final period, most of the neurological symptoms are finished, unless you kind of go down the wrong path at the tipping point and have continuing symptoms. But for a healthy woman, they're going to sort themselves out. Oh, the other neurological symptom is, it's a little scary, but it's this temporary kind of cognitive decline, actually. Like it's decline is the wrong word, but it's like you start forgetting words. It can be very disconcerting. And you think, like this example I use in my book is I forgot where I parked my car one day, and my husband and stepdaughter were sitting in the car and they're watching me like where did you not remember that we're in this car park? So things like that. And when it happens, it's a little weird. But it's important to know that in most women that is temporary, and you come back up to your full mental powers, and treatment can help as well. So
yes. And so did we mention hot flashes too, or no?
Night sweats, hot flashes, or as we say down under, hot flushes.
And then so in terms of maybe lifestyle, non-hormonal treatment options, in terms of what you find has worked well, what are some options?
Let's go through them. And I'll just preface it by saying I do support hormonal therapy as well. So none of this is to say that women shouldn't take hormones. Like, that's an option too. But non-hormonal things, which work really well for a lot of women, is number one, and this is very unpopular, but I'll start with it, is quit alcohol. I just honestly couldn't be more certain of this. I've seen it consistently across patients, friends, myself. Like,
and when you say quit, like 100%, or like reduce significantly?
Okay. Well, at least give yourself the gift of a couple months with none, and just see how it feels, because definitely alcohol will trigger hot flashes, night sweats the day you have it, but also there's a cumulative effect. So it's all to do, I think a lot of it's to do with circadian rhythm. So one of the things that's recalibrating with perimenopause is circadian rhythm, is the actual part in our hypothalamus, that our body clock. And that's wobbling because it's very much affected by estradiol and progesterone. So it's wobbling, it's trying to find its new legs. And alcohol worsens that. So there is a deepening of sleep and just a feeling better that comes after a few weeks off alcohol. So I would just invite people to try it. And what I sometimes say to my patients is, when you get out the other side of this and you're like 55 and in Italy, or, traveling or whatever it is, you can kick back and have your glass of wine and, be sort of return to having occasional alcohol. And it's probably not a big deal. The other reason to probably avoid alcohol during this time, which is a kind of a separate issue, but it's a cancer risk. Actually, I just saw in the Canadian news today a big thing about alcohol and cancer. So alcohol is a breast cancer risk specifically. And my understanding of the current research is that actually even moderate alcohol intake, so not even a drink a day, but close to that, is more of a risk for breast cancer than modern estrogen therapy is. So just to frame that, it's not nothing, it's pretty significant. So that's another, and this sort of a riskier time, I think, for breast cancer risk, because our estrogen is going so high, and because we're losing progesterone, which normally protects our breast to some extent. So, okay, number one, so alcohol. Number two, move the body. So the brain loves movement. So perimenopause is a neurological transition. The brain is recalibrating. As I say in my book, the brain is rewiring. Have you had other guests talk about how much the brain loves the body to move? It's just this crazy thing.
Well, in general, for sure, like in terms of managing stress, anxiety, and all these things, and then also being a repellent for dementia. We talked a little bit about that too, but not in this context. So
this is like muscle. I think it's something to do with called BDNF. That's the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Gets stimulated by movement. Obviously, I'm a big fan of moving outside. So getting that, especially in the morning, some morning light for circadian rhythm, and move your body. And I always talk about movement now rather than exercise, because exercise sounds like a chore, whereas movement is joyful. It should be like just whatever it is you like to do, and maybe stop worrying about the experts and, you should do this much strength. I mean, strength training is great if you enjoy it, but I did a little poll on my Instagram account, is like, tell me what the movement is you love and why. And I remember this one comment, which I'm actually going to put in my new book. This woman said she loves Brazilian jiu-jitsu and she will die on that hill. Like, she's never going to change. I'm like, are you going to talk that person into doing some other kind of movement when this is what she loves.
But this is what it comes down to. I've always,
yeah.
like, one of the things we say on the show all the time is, like, find what works for you. Like, there's
Yeah.
no cookie cutter solution. Like, I'm a big fan of resistance training for a lot of people,
Yes.
but like, I would rather you go for walks if that's going to get you more active than hit some gym that you don't like, that you're less motivated to go to. So 100% with that. 100%.
Every kind of movement that's been studied, as far as I know, for perimenopausal symptoms gives some relief. So yes, strength training, resistance training, yoga, walking, it helps. So a lot of people in the UK are really into cold water swimming, which is another thing.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you could do that in New Zealand too, if you wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I
I
occasionally will jump in. I'll jump in a mountain lake sometimes if I'm feeling brave. So, So going down the list, the next thing would be, well, I'm going to put a supplement in there, and then we'll carry on with lifestyle things. But I'm a huge fan of magnesium, and so
that's a good one.
we have these magnesium powders down under in Australia and New Zealand that have a combined magnesium and the amino acid taurine. So I talk about that in the book quite a lot. I mean, in North America, you can get them separately. They're both inexpensive, safe. I mean, it's just one of these supplements, and it can be a real game changer. And I think there's a few things going on. Both magnesium and taurine stabilize the GABA system, like the GABAergic system. So they're quite calming. They both help with energy production in the mitochondria, and so help with insulin sensitivity. So it's sort of stabilizing metabolism during this metabolic recalibration. It's stabilizing the brain. It can really help with sleep. It's just a simple intervention. And often, as you know, if you could just start feeling a bit better and sleeping, then you can do the other things. Then you've got more energy to eat better and go for that walk or like gym session or whatever it is. So I don't hold back with the magnesium. I just do it.
Yeah. And also there's like little downside, maybe the GI side if you overdo it, but like really there's minimal downside to throwing down some mag.
Yeah, it's safe, it's inexpensive. Yeah. So people can, with my perimenopause book, my editor at one point said, "Oh my goodness, should we just put this in the water for everyone?" Yeah.
I take it.
Yeah. All right. And then carrying on, I think for what it's worth with my patients, I do like to, around that, in their women's 40s, test for insulin resistance. If I think there might be insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, I feel like now is the time to know. And not everyone's going to have it, which is great. They can then focus on some of the other things. But if there is insulin resistance, then because it's a tipping point for diseases, and because perimenopause is a tipping point, and because insulin resistance itself can create symptoms and make the whole transition more difficult, it's really the perfect time to reverse insulin resistance. And I'm sure you've probably had guests talk about that. And
well, it was a big theme for us, like for the pandemic, because of how much metabolic syndrome was a player in our COVID patients. So we covered a lot on how we reverse it. So it's a topic that is very close and dear to my heart.
Okay. Well, you can put some links in the show notes to some of your other episodes. I mean, there's lots of different ways to come at it. So again, there's no cookie cutter one way. I mean, I think, for example, through my lens, actually, I think the gut plays a pretty big role in some of it. There's something called metabolic endotoxemia, which is a lot about, anyway, without getting too technical, LPS from the gut, from affecting insulin sensitivity. So there's lots of things. And magnesium helps moving the body and changing your diet. So broad strokes, it should be a whole food diet, as close to a whole food diet as you can, giving up the ultra processed foods. I would argue women in perimenopause do require more protein than when they were younger. Like there is a value in upping your protein, especially your morning protein, which both helps you feel, with satiety, helps you feel full, and also helps to entrain the circadian rhythms. So, I mean, people might be exploring different modes of intermittent fasting, and I also think that's good. I would say for women, one thing I would just say, like, to factor everything in, but I think some protein by 10 a.m., some amino acids by 10 a.m., just to help entrain circadian rhythm and calm the brain, and just is good. So if you can work that into your, fasting, I don't know how much if you've talked about.
Yeah, it was one of the things that I've slowly opened my eyes to was the differences between men and women when it came to fasting, like in terms of like this is just not
Yeah.
this is just anecdote, not a professional
Yeah.
opinion or anything, but I'm hearing more stories about exactly what you're describing, like having, if you're going to fast, do the earlier window stuff, like eat earlier and then end, like have your last meal earlier as a better way of transitioning. Definitely hearing more about the increase in protein. I mean, I think most people need more protein in general,
Yeah.
but you know, doing these like 24-hour fasts and or longer, I think for a lot of what I'm seeing, like middle-aged women, like if anything, it seems like it's detrimental, or almost like there's hormone imbalance, more cortisol that's developed. But once again, this is just me hearing with my like hear what I hearing through other podcasts and anecdotes. But
Well, there isn't a lot of research, so we all of us are kind of having to go somewhat on anecdotal evidence. I think the main consensus at the moment, and that could change, is that women do have sort of a more sensitive nervous system in terms of cortisol response, and fasting is a little stressful. But I think for some women, it depends on what else is going on in your life and just everything. But like, I think if I say to my patients, if you feel stressed or unhappy, fasting should feel good, right? It should feel like, again, give your body the gift of being in a gentle fasted state. And if it's stressful and making you not sleep, or then something's not right and you need to tweak that. The other thing I would just say about on the topic of fasting, just more broadly, zooming out, is potentially for young women. So young women need to be very careful. So I'm in the camp where I do think women can do intermittent fasting. I don't have some blanket rule about how women can't do it or anything like that, especially women in the perimenopause transition and maybe beyond, when we're trying to deal with this shift to insulin resistance and counter that. Even young women with maybe polycystic ovary syndrome and confirmed insulin resistance can benefit from some gentle fasting. So it's always the individual. But one thing I would just point out for anyone listening, especially healthcare practitioners or young women themselves, there's one of the things that's happening is it's a slightly different topic, but a lot of young women are being mistakenly told they have PCOS when they don't. And it's coming from reliance on the ultrasound finding of polycystic ovaries, which really doesn't mean anything at all, because any woman can have polycystic appearing ovaries at any time. It just means a high number of follicles, undeveloped follicles. It just means you didn't ovulate that month for whatever reason. For example, so here's a very specific thing. Women who have lost their period to under eating can show polycystic ovaries on ultrasound. That's called hypothalamic amenorrhea. Now, if you mistakenly say, oh, boom, you've got PCOS, and then she's going to Google and say, oh, this treatment for PCOS is low carb, and she's already under eating. I mean, I'm just saying this because this is happening. And then she goes, I need to fix my PCOS by eating less, by restricting carbs. And as you probably know, restricting carbs and eating more protein actually suppresses your appetite. So these young women are in trouble. Like they are, I mean, it's fixable, but like they are going 180 degrees in the wrong direction. They're not getting their periods. They're very upset. They think they're broken. They're going to need the pill because they can't do it. And they just need to eat more. And in that case, they need carbs. Those young women should not be low carb or intermittent fasting. They're already under eating. So
thanks for highlighting that, because I do think it's good to kind of highlight who the ideal group is and who isn't the ideal group to be doing some of these interventions.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So trying to reverse metabolic syndrome, or trying to at least assess for metabolic syndrome. Anything else for managing?
Well, those are the big ones. So I'll just summarize for everyone listening. We talked about alcohol, coating alcohol, moving the body, taking magnesium, maybe with taurine, and whatever steps are required to reverse insulin resistance. And for most women, that does a lot. And then beyond that, I guess with my patients beyond that, I am looking at hormone therapy. My approach is a little different in that in the early perimenopausal years, I may look at using progesterone only. And so by and then look at estrogen coming in later. And now, so there is another guest you should have. I keep dropping these names.
Name drop away.
So her name is Professor Geraldine Pryor. She's at UBC. She's a reproductive endocrinologist. She runs an organization called the Center for Menstruation and Ovulation Research. She and I have written a paper together. She's a scientist. So she's a scientist. She was a clinician. Has been a scientist. She's for 4 decades. She's published over 100 papers, a lot of them on progesterone. So she's a big advocate for the role of progesterone itself, not just estrogen. So, and this is, when I say progesterone, this is different than just the progestins that are put there to protect the uterine lining. This is body identical progesterone, which in Canada is prometrium, and it can lighten flow, which is, so for those perimenopausal women with crazy heavy periods, that can help. It can also, it's very active in the brain. So I don't know if you know, or your listeners know, but progesterone, real progesterone, metabolizes to a neurosteroid called allopregnanolone, which is it interacts with GABA receptors. It's hugely important for the brain, actually. All of us make some degree of allopregnanolone all the time, men and women, everyone makes it, some amount of it, but women of reproductive age make a huge amount. And then obviously during pregnancy, even more. And our brains are kind of used to that and rely on it. So this is one of the reasons that real progesterone can be used therapeutically for some of the neurological symptoms, including sleep disturbance, migraines, anxiety. So yeah, I can send you some links for that. And if you want to get Professor Pryor on your podcast, that would be awesome. She'd be a great guest.
No, this is gold. Lara, wow. So yeah, as you mentioned, those are lifestyle approaches,
looking
at progesterone,
progesterone only.
Yeah,
I have a couple. And then
keep going.
Yeah, and then then estrogen can come in at some point. Like if then estrogen therapy is required at some point, usually later in the perimenopause transition, like basically around when periods start to stop and have big gaps between periods, and then the year after the final period, and that's when the body is recalibrating to that lower estrogen, and that's particularly when estrogen therapy, and estrogen therapy, for anyone listening probably know this, but it's all body identical now. Like when I started practicing 25 years ago, hormones were not body identical. You know what I mean by that, right? Like modern day hormone therapy they're molecules that are exactly identical to estradiol and progesterone. That's what we're taking now and giving. Whereas in the past, and obviously hormonal birth control is not body identical. So there is a difference. I mean, we know now that this is why the standard hormone therapy is body identical, because it's safer. So modern day estrogen patches are, I would say to your listeners, natural progesterone, what we used to call natural hormones. It's the standard now, which is so good.
Thank God.
Yeah.
So not to get, I don't know if this is a good question or not, but like if my perusal of some of the treatment for the perimenopausal women was that they were going estrogen first with some of the with progesterone, but so like what's the philosophy difference, or and I might be getting it wrong, so
no, you put your finger on, there is a almost, I would say, a paradigm shift involved here. So this idea to use progesterone itself therapeutically is radical. Yes, you were right. So the conventional mode has been it's all about estrogen, and then you choose whichever progestin or progesterone in some cases you want it purely only for the sake of the uterine lining. Like that's the mainstream view. And this is why I mentioned Professor Geraldine Pryor, because she's been for 40 years trying to, be the champion of this different approach. And so it is a paradigm shift. It is some of, doctors listening, I'll be thinking, wait, what? I've never heard of using prometrium on its own for things. But yes, so that is, you are correct. That has not been standard, but it is an option, and it's quite a big topic. So I'll let Geraldine describe that to you if you can get her on the podcast. Yeah.
Oh, we'll get her.
You'll get her.
I'll name drop. We're persistent. We got you. So and just to give the listeners a sense, like with what you're describing, like the lifestyle changes, the potential for hormone treatment, like how successful are we, like amongst your patients? How successful in terms of managing symptoms are you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I haven't been collecting formal data. I kind of wish I had, but I would say my anecdotally, this is what my expectation. Like if a patient comes to me now, like just standard, 45, night sweats, premenstrually, not sleeping, getting more migraines, just not feeling great, feeling a little jittery, kind of, wobbly. And then I would say, look, okay, do these. If you can do these things, just commit to some amount of moving your body. Trust me on the alcohol thing and take this magnesium taurine powder and come back to me in 2 or 3 months and let's just see where you're at. Or check-ins earlier, actually, because it can work faster than that. And I usually tell them, I think it's a 50% chance that's all you're going to need. And then also I'll test for insulin resistance at that point as well. But so 50%, I'd say it's about 50%. That's all. And some women are happy about that. They don't even really want hormone therapy. They're like, I'm good. If I'm good, if I'm, my symptoms are good and I don't have any perceived, disease risks, then I'm just going to keep going. Whereas I think about 50% need more help in some form. And that's where obviously I do a little bit of herbal medicine prescribing as well, but that's where hormone therapy could start to come in as well. There's another nutrient I want to mention while I'm still before I forget. And it's choline. Do you know about choline?
No, I don't know about choline.
Okay. So it's one of these, it's considered a conditionally essential nutrient. There are a few like that. Actually, taurine would be conditionally essential. Choline, it means that we can manufacture some of it ourselves, like our body can produce it, but we also clearly are expecting to consume it. Choline it's just so important for so many things, but it's very important for brain health. It's the precursor to acetylcholine. It's part of cell membranes. It's very much involved in helping to prevent fatty liver and improve insulin sensitivity. So there's a lot going on with choline. And the enzyme in our body that makes choline is estrogen dependent. So there is this automatic shift in the later phases of perimenopause when estrogen starts to go down, where we're going to have a higher choline requirement, some of us. And there's a paper out there, which you can put in the show notes, called The Cholinergic Effects of Estrogen. Basically, in this paper, they're kind of building the case like, wow, are some of the brain benefits of estrogen therapy really about how it promotes choline? And I would just say, because you can also just take choline. So when I gave the story earlier about forgetting where we parked our car, like just these moments of like, what the heck is my brain doing? I knew I tried choline because I had previously done one of those nutritional DNA tests, and I'm not necessarily saying everyone needs to do that, but I happen to know that I have a double SNP, what's called like a variant of the enzyme that makes choline. So it's called the PEMT enzyme, so PEMT gene. So I'm already a low choline producer. Then layer on menopause, and I thought, well, I'm going to try this. So and you can imagine, I'm a naturopathic doctor. So for 30 years, I've been trying supplements. It's what we do. It's like you read about something, it's like, I'm going to take that. I'm going to try that. And so taking activated choline, called the one I took, not a brand name, but the form is called alpha GPC. And I took that, I started taking that, and my brain switched back on. Like, I honestly couldn't believe it. Like, I started sleeping and my sort of memory came back. And I thought, and I'm not saying that's going to work as well for everyone, because obviously I particularly had a requirement for it, but choline is pretty interesting nutrient. It comes mostly from animal foods, which is where we start to get into some of the controversy around that. People on a plant-based diet are kind of, I don't know how your listeners, where they sit on all of that, but every time I try to talk about choline on my social media, I get a lot of very angry plant-based diet people, because it's sort of one of these things where if choline is that important, then plant-based just doesn't make sense, because clearly we're supposed to be eating it. So we get it from eggs, liver, meat, dairy to some extent. There's a little bit, to be fair, there's a little bit of choline in plant foods, but not very much. And the other people who really need choline, this is a little bit off topic now, but is pregnant women. Some researchers, if you start looking into choline, you'll see this kind of debate going on, because there's currently no like recommended daily really dose for it. And yet some researchers are saying for a healthy pregnancy, you probably need like 900 milligrams, and most people are getting like 100 from their diet. So it's, it speaks to, it's evolutionary mismatch. I think our ancestors, I'm pretty confident they were eating they were eating organ meats. Basically, they were like potentially
sure.
kind of harvesting brains and stuff from, I mean, this is now kind of going into a different topic, but I think we evolved on a lot of nutrient dense animal food.
It's funny.
Including
I
choline.
mean, we were looking, so we've found the founder of the name escapes me all of a sudden. But basically a farmer in Leduc, Alberta, that he basically sells organ meats in capsule form. And
Oh, right.
we were
Yeah.
looking at this a while ago, and there's a company in New Zealand too. I'm forgetting their name now as well. But you just have all these kind of, I wouldn't say hidden, but subtle benefits of from organ meats. It just reminded me of that too, about some of the additions that you could get. Because I mean, nowadays, like my kids ain't eating liver. You know what I mean? Like
You could hide it and stuff. You could
no,
like
but
put it in.
I give
Yeah.
them, I let them have the supplement. It's
Oh, good. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Now they're superstars. But yeah, this is honestly, this is extreme gold. I want to. I know this is a loaded question, but I'm seeing if we can maybe um do a short version. But when it
Yeah.
comes to, like, there's also an evolutionary mismatch when it comes to women's periods, as you mentioned, and you feel like the amount of symptoms shouldn't be for everybody to the degree that they are. I'm wondering either how to mitigate some of that, like for our younger folks. I know it's, looking at your face, it looks like a loaded question, but if
Well,
it,
so yeah, keep going. Yeah. Yeah.
but I mean, I want to hear your thoughts, just because
Yeah.
this is something that's totally foreign to me.
Okay. All right. So periods periods should not be symptomatic. So I do set the bar quite high just from a biological perspective. A healthy natural menstrual cycle should just arrive, every approximately a month. It definitely does not have to be exactly every 28 days. Absolutely not. But like approximately a month. It shouldn't be too heavy. Shouldn't lose more than about 80 milliliters, which is the contents of an egg. I love that kind of analogy. Like, so the over all the days of the period. So a few tablespoons over all the days of the period. Shouldn't be painful. Shouldn't have significant mood distress leading up to it. Some subtle changes in energy, sure. And like some subtle changes in how you feel. Yeah, you can even harness that and sort of ride that. Like that's a hormonal resilience kind of thing. In fact, women get this, the researchers, we get this almost there. Some of the researchers describe it almost superhuman sort of few days leading up to ovulation when our estrogen spikes and we get this little bump up in testosterone, and women get quite powerful during that time, especially during sports performances. But like sports, that's when the superhuman part comes up, but more resilient to stress. So for a lot of women, there's this like really nice. And as a menopausal woman, I do miss that. I miss the ovulatory kind of shine. We know from the research that women get, it makes sense actually, right? When you're fertile, when you're ovulating, you get more outgoing. It's like the seeking behavior. Appetite gets suppressed, and instead you kind of go out and just want to meet people and not necessarily have sex, but like you're sort of in this like more like outgoing mode, which is really nice. Actually, I do miss that. But yeah, and then so my expectation is no symptoms. Now I do understand. Probably even just your listeners are gonna be thinking, wait, what the heck? I have, how is that possible? I've got endometriosis, I've got symptoms. It's like, okay. I mean, obviously I acknowledge there are going to be some limits to that. Like everything, it's a nuanced conversation, but my experience, and that's why I wrote my first book, Period Repair Manual, for most people, not everyone, but for most people, symptomless periods are possible. And a lot of it you can do with diet, supplements, movement. One of my favorite Amazon reviews that I ever got for Period Repair Manual. Some of them are really great, actually. But one of them, she's like, wow, I had no idea that what you eat could affect your period. Like, yeah, women have no idea. Of course, what you eat affects your period because what you eat affects your health. And menstruation is only an expression of health. It's one part of health. It's not separate.
Well, I mean, we don't, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I go to medical school. We don't acknowledge this at all, really. Like in terms of what nutrition is doing to disease states, we don't touch on that at all. So like, I mean, I think there's a disconnect for people to think like, oh man, the fact that I don't know, I'm eating something that might be highly processed compared to something that isn't, might be affecting my body. So like, is it the same principles that we're hearing for perimenopausal women? Like, is it like avoiding processed food, making sure we sleep, movement?
A lot of it's going to be the same. So I talk about a couple things. Like, so just to say again, healthy menstruation, healthy perimenopause is an expression of general health. So in Period to Period Manual, I talk about our natural period being our monthly report card. It's quite handy, actually. With my male patients, I'm like, wait, I don't have this monthly report card to ask you about or check in about. So periods are a monthly report card. And then perimenopause is kind of like the final exam before graduating to menopause. So it's a lot of the same principles apply. Yeah.
That's good to know, because I think that gives a lot of people hope. And I think maybe, Lara, we're going to have you back on even to tackle this one, because this is, once again, selfishly, as somebody that wants to be more holistic and look at ways that we could better serve our patients, this is another area that to me is an absolute like, I'm so ignorant when it comes to this. So I would love an opportunity to learn more. And maybe we could end off a little bit with, how do people connect with you? I know your Instagram is blowing up. It's unbelievable, the amount of followers and engagement there. But where can people follow you?
Yeah, I'm easy to find. So my blog is larabriden.com, and from there you can link to my podcast. Is very modest. It's just me like chatting about things, like little 15-minute chats. I put that out about once a month. And then my social media is all at Lara Briden, and I've got 2 books so far. I'm working on my 3rd, but my 2 books are Period to Period Manual for women of any age who have periods, and Hormone Repair Manual for women over 40.
Amazing. And Lara, it's Lara Briden podcast, right? That's just
larabriden.com, Lara Briden podcast. That'll find me.
That'll find you. Thank you so much. It meant a lot to me and to our listeners, and this was fantastic.
Thanks for inviting me.